Logan Sargeant wasn't just another rookie turning up on an F1 weekend. He arrived wearing the weight of a storyline: America's return to the grid. The last US driver to start a race had been Alexander Rossi in 2015, and for a long time fans back home had been waiting for the next one. Formula One was growing fast in America, with Austin, then Miami, and later Las Vegas joining the calendar. During that surge, Williams signed an American driver to their academy and then handed him a full-time seat. From Williams' point of view, it made perfect sense. Formula One had cracked its once impossible US market with Netflix's Drive to Survive, turning unfamiliar names into minor celebrities. Sponsors wanted American connections, ticket sales were climbing, and suddenly putting the Stars and Stripes on the grid could mean as much commercially as finding an extra tenth of a second. Sargeant fit perfectly into that equation: young, polished, molded in the European junior ladder, and with a convenient US passport. He looked like the safe investment to lock American audiences into one of Formula One's most historic teams. The launch of his career reflected that commercial focus. The louder story wasn't his sector times in junior formulas. It was about Netflix shots of a young American climbing into an F1 cockpit while a US crowd cheered behind the fences.
My name is Logan Sargeant, and I'm 19 years old, racing for Prema.
On paper, Logan Sargeant had exactly the kind of resume people expect from a Formula One driver. As a teenager, he moved from Florida to Europe, chasing the F1 dream through karting and junior formulas. His talent shone bright in the feeder series, notably in 2020 when he finished third in the FIA F3 Championship with Prema, narrowly missing the title to Oscar Piastri. That season was fiercely competitive, with no runaway winner and a title fight that swung back and forth race after race. By the final round, all three drivers, Piastri, Théo Pourchaire and Sargeant, had a mathematical shot at the championship. That top three finish in F3 meant something important. He had proven himself in equal machines against drivers who are now considered some of the brightest stars of the future. Piastri's title win put him on the express lane to Formula One. Pourchaire's runner-up result gave him the reputation of a prodigy, and Sargeant wasn't far behind them, separated by a few critical weekends. His biggest problem was inconsistency. When he was quick enough to win, but bad weekends dragged him down the order. Still, being third in that particular field immediately stamped him as an F1 caliber prospect. In Formula 2, he broke through in 2022 by securing multiple podiums and a fourth-place championship finish, enough to meet the FIA superlicense requirements for F1. He didn't storm through F2 like Charles Leclerc or George Russell had done, but his performances were respectable. He scored podiums, showed racecraft, and demonstrated enough promise for Williams Racing to sign him to its academy. After scrambling together sponsorship and backing, Williams promoted him to F1 for 2023 as a replacement for Nicholas Latifi. At 22, Sargeant was about to become the first US driver on the F1 grid since 2015 and the first full-time American in 16 years.
Yeah, here we are in Canada. It's a track I've always wanted to drive.
Entering 2023, expectations for Sargeant were cautiously optimistic. Williams knew their rookie would need time to adjust, but they hoped his experience in F2 would translate into a solid first F1 campaign. Unfortunately, the stopwatch gave a brutal reality check. Over 22 qualifying sessions in 2023, Logan Sargeant failed to beat Alex Albon once, 0-22. In races, Sargeant seldom beat Albon on merit. The few times he finished ahead were largely when Albon hit trouble. By season's end, Sargeant had scored just 1 point to Albon's 27, finishing 21st in the Drivers' Championship, while Albon claimed 13th. That single point came at his home race in Austin, where he finished 10th after post-race penalties promoted him into the points, making him the first American to score an F1 point since 1993. It was a symbolic moment that should have felt triumphant, but it was overshadowed by the broader pattern of struggle. The mistakes began early and never stopped. He introduced himself to F1's chaos by crashing into Nick de Vries on a late restart in Australia, earning a DNF in his second race. At Baku, he reached Q2 for the first time, only to wreck the car in the sprint shootout, forcing a withdrawal from the sprint race. In Canada, an oil leak ended his race on lap 6. The mistakes kept coming throughout the season. At Suzuka, he crashed heavily in qualifying, necessitating a pit lane start and 10-second penalty before colliding with Valtteri Bottas in the race, an incident that put both cars out. Singapore saw him clip the wall on lap 20 and limp home with a broken front wing, squandering a potential points finish. Even his moments of promise tended to unravel. At Zandvoort, he impressively made Q3, but promptly binned the car in that final session and later crashed out in the race due to what the team cited as a hydraulic failure. Williams' garage began to resemble a wreckage yard courtesy of Sargeant's mishaps, and the repair bill climbed into multiples of millions of dollars on his side of the garage. Team principal James Vowles acknowledged that Sargeant had a tendency to push beyond the car's limits and toward the scene of an accident. Each crash not only hurt the team's finances under Formula One's cost cap, but also damaged Sargeant's confidence and credibility. To his credit, the Floridian owned up to some mistakes, calling his Japan practice shunt a bit of a silly error, one that I shouldn't be making. But the frequency of such errors made it hard to see improvement. By the final rounds of 2023, everyone was ranking Sargeant at or near the bottom of the entire F1 field based on performance. Even within the team, frustration was becoming apparent. You could see it in subtle ways. Choices about who gets the upgraded chassis, who gets a strategy experiment, or how bluntly feedback is shared. The balance shifted as the team leaned harder on Alex Albon, who was trusted to bring the car home and capitalise on any weekend when the midfield opened up. Sargeant, by contrast, got framed as the risk. Sargeant retained his seat for 2024, but even before the season began, there were signs of doubt. Williams only confirmed his contract renewal in December 2023, 5 days after the season finale, long after most teams had finalised their lineups. It suggested the team had explored alternatives before ultimately giving Sargeant a reprieve. Internally, the mandate for year 2 was clear: score more than 1 point and crash a lot less. The opening rounds of 2024 did little to inspire confidence. In Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, Sargeant finished near the back after pedestrian qualifying efforts. Then came an unusual flashpoint at the Australian Grand Prix that spoke volumes about the team's faith in him. When Albon destroyed his chassis in a practice crash and Williams realised they had no spare, the team made the controversial call to sacrifice Sargeant's weekend entirely, giving Albon Sargeant's chassis for the race. As a result, Sargeant withdrew before qualifying so that Albon could continue. The decision was a stark admission that, at this early stage, Williams believed Albon was their only real shot at points. Albon called Sargeant a true gentleman, a true team player, for how graciously he handled effectively being benched. Yet the incident surely rattled Sargeant. By his own admission, it was the hardest moment of his career. It also crystallised the pecking order. Sargeant was firmly second fiddle, and he would have to fight to regain the team's trust. If anything, the pressure mounted on Sargeant after Australia. At the very next round in Japan, he promptly crashed in FP1, losing the rear at Dunlop Curve and burying the car in the gravel. "I put the car into a place I didn't realise I was at, a silly error," he conceded. In the race, he ran as high as 11th, but locked up and went off track, ultimately finishing 17th. It was wild to watch. One weekend, Sargeant would show glimmers of competence, such as a points-paying 10th in the Miami sprint race, or a strong run to P11 at Silverstone, just 1 spot shy of the points, and the next he'd squander it with an accident. At his home race in Miami, an opening lap collision with Kevin Magnussen, largely not his fault, put him out of the Grand Prix. In Canada, after a solid P13 qualifying, his first Q2 appearance of the year, Sargeant spun out of a wet race, throwing away a potential decent finish. 2 more rounds in Spain and Austria yielded finishes at the very back of the field. Only at the British Grand Prix did Sargeant finally string together a complete drive, qualifying 12th and finishing 11th in a clean race. That Silverstone result, agonisingly close to a point, was his best of 2024 and seemed to validate Vowles' tough love approach. In In fact, it came just after Valve publicly reminded Sargeant that F1 is a meritocracy and that his seat was under constant evaluation, comments which Sargeant said spurred him on that weekend. But such flashes were not nearly frequent enough to justify Sargeant's place. Through 13 rounds in 2024, he still had 0 points versus Albon's growing tally and remained winless in the qualifying duel, bringing the cumulative qualifying score to 35-0 in Albon's favour by late summer. Even accounting for occasional car updates that Albon received first, this was a brutal indicator of how comprehensively Sargeant was outclassed. Off-track, the scrutiny was intensifying. Rumours swirled that Williams was eyeing replacements imminently. Names like Mercedes prospect Kimi Antonelli were floated despite his youth. "I still don't understand why they re-signed Sargeant for this year," remarked Karun Chandhak, arguing Williams should have looked elsewhere for a second driver. Fellow analyst Jolyon Palmer agreed. Sargeant never should have stayed on, calling Sargeant's continuation a costly, wasted effort. By the Belgium Grand Prix in late July 2024, Williams had effectively decided Sargeant's fate. They announced during the Spa weekend that Ferrari's Carlos Sainz Jr. would join the team in 2025, meaning Sargeant's seat was gone at year's end. Publicly, Valve continued to encourage Sargeant to fight for his place, but he also admitted the team was continually evaluating its options and that Sargeant needed to earn his spot on merit. Sargeant, for his part, vowed to fight no matter what, insisting he could still prove himself worthy. Any hopes of a late-season renaissance were crushed, quite literally, at the very next event after the summer break. Zandvoort 2024 proved to be the final straw. Williams brought a major upgrade package to the Dutch Grand Prix, and for once, Sargeant had the same spec car as Albon from the start of the weekend. It was a golden chance for him to finally shine on equal footing. Instead, in a damp final practice, Sargeant lost control exiting turn 3, dipping a wheel on the wet grass and smashed his upgraded FW46 hard into the barriers, the car bursting into flames. The shunt utterly destroyed one of the few new aerodynamic packages the small team had produced, and the damage was so extensive that the Williams crew could not rebuild the car in time for qualifying, meaning Sargeant didn't set a time and started the race from the back. Finishing a distant 16th on Sunday was merely an epilogue. The real damage had been done. 2 days later, Williams made it official. Logan Sargeant was released from his drive with immediate effect, just 14 races into his sophomore season. In announcing the decision, Valve diplomatically thanked Sargeant for his effort and attitude, but explained that the team needed to maximise every point-scoring opportunity in a tight midfield fight. Keeping Sargeant for the rest of the year, Valve admitted would be almost unfair, both to the team and to Sargeant, given that it was clear he had reached the limit of what he's able to achieve in the Williams car. But what was actually the problem of Sargeant? Was he really so bad at driving, or was it something else? When Sargeant first came into Formula One, Williams packaged him as someone who wasn't looking for excuses. The press cycle positioned him as businesslike, a rookie who wanted to prove his worth through results instead of words. Sargeant embraced the spotlight, writing about his journey and mentality of no excuses when given the right opportunity. But that narrative didn't last. As his struggles mounted, his growing pattern of explanation started drawing criticism. Media circles noticed that interviews often featured a focus on how the car handled, how setups didn't match what he needed, or how circumstances beyond his control shaped the result. High-performance culture feeds on accountability. When a driver takes ownership, "I overdid it in that corner, I need to fix it," it signals that they recognize the problem and are committed to changing it. That fosters belief from engineers, mechanics, and bosses. A pattern of shifting responsibility outward does the opposite. It tells the garage that improvement is unlikely because the driver doesn't see the issue sitting inside the cockpit. Over time, that builds mistrust, and once that mistrust forms, even tiny mistakes become magnified. In Sargeant's place, Williams promoted 21-year-old academy driver Franco Colapinto from Formula 2 for the remainder of 2024. The move was a bold gamble on youth, echoing Williams' historic philosophy of investing in new talent. Almost immediately, it cast Sargeant's performance in an even harsher light. Colapinto had zero F1 experience and jumped into the car cold at the Italian Grand Prix, yet within a handful of races he was delivering results that Sargeant hadn't managed all year. In his first 4 Grand Prix, the Argentine scored 5 championship points for Williams, more than Sargeant's 0 in 2024, including a points finish on debut. Paddock insiders were impressed. Suddenly, Colapinto's name was being whispered in silly season talks for other teams' 2025 seats. It must be said that Colapinto's fairy tale start came back to earth as he later suffered a couple of heavy crashes himself. A shunt in Brazil and a 50G qualifying wreck in Las Vegas tempered the hype. He ultimately was not retained for 2025 as Williams had already secured Sainz and kept Albon. But the damage to Sargeant's reputation was done. The equipment hadn't changed, only the driver, and suddenly the car was scoring points again. Sargeant's Formula One chapter effectively closed with that Williams announcement in August 2024. There was no mid-season lifeline from another team. The remaining open seats for 2025 all went to drivers with stronger resumes. Sargeant's short-lived career, 36 starts, 0 podiums, 0 wins, 1 lonely point, became a talking point in discussions about the absence of US talent in F1. As for Sargeant himself, he began plotting the next steps of his racing career outside F1. He tested an IndyCar with Meyer Shank Racing in late 2024, hinting at a possible move to America's open-wheel series. He also signed and later backed out of an endurance racing deal in Europe, citing the need to recuperate mentally after the intense F1 experience. By mid-2025, Sargeant announced a return to sports car racing in IMSA's LMP2 class, dipping his toes back into competition in a lower-pressure environment. In interviews, he reflected on his F1 stint with a mix of gratitude and regret, admitting that after such a hectic, intense, emotionally challenging period, he needed to break to reset. Notably, he did not slam Williams or make excuses for how it ended. If anything, he seemed to acknowledge that perhaps it was all too much too soon. Whether Sargeant can reinvent himself in another series remains to be seen. At 24 years old, he's still young by racing standards, and an IndyCar switch could even revive his name domestically. As one commentator wryly noted, we had an American driver in F1, but few cared. Once Sargeant's struggles became apparent, and soon he was gone. It's a somewhat cruel assessment, but it underlines how quickly excitement can turn to apathy if results don't follow. The dramatic irony is clear. Sargeant was meant to be the face of American motorsport's arrival into the F1 mainstream, a figure who represented not just personal ambition, but a cultural crossover. Instead, his career highlighted the risks of investing too much in narrative over performance. Once the results stopped aligning with the story, the hype evaporated. Looking back, several factors might have changed Sargeant's trajectory. The most obvious is time. Many successful F1 drivers have struggled in their early years before finding their groove. Jenson Button, for example, didn't win a race until his 6th season, but Button showed steady improvement and occasional flashes of brilliance that kept teams believing. Sargeant's curve flattened. He wasn't getting notably better, just repeating the same patterns. Perhaps a different team environment could have helped. Williams, despite their storied history, were rebuilding their technical capabilities and culture under new leadership. A rookie driver needs stability and clear development programs. Instead, Sargeant found himself in an organization that was itself learning how to compete again after years of struggle. The pressure of being the American hope added another layer of complexity that might have been better managed at a more established team. The chassis allocation controversy also raises questions about whether Sargeant ever received a truly fair chance. While teams regularly give slight equipment advantages to their lead drivers, the perception that Albon consistently received the better car became the narrative that followed Sargeant throughout his tenure. Whether this was reality or excuse-making depends on who you ask, but it certainly didn't help his cause. Most fundamentally, Sargeant might have benefited from more time in junior formulas before making the F1 leap. His 4th place F2 finish was respectable but not dominant. Many successful F1 drivers either win their F2 championship or show such overwhelming speed that teams can't ignore them. Sargeant was competent enough to meet the license requirements, but perhaps needed another year to truly master the craft before facing F1's unforgiving environment. The simple truth is that Formula One rewards constant growth, and without that, even small gaps become career-ending. Do you think we'll see an American driver in F1 soon? Maybe Cadillac would come in with one. Any thoughts on who that might be? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.